Hi, I'm Sterling Edwards. Thank you for joining me. Let's spend a few minutes discussing snow. When snow hits the ground, of course, it has some volume, it has some depth. And a lot of times you're looking at snow out across a flat field and you got these slight suggestions of movement, because anything snow falls on, the snow is going to take on the same contour as what it falls on. A good example would be to suggest maybe there's a fallen log and snow goes out across the field and it goes up over that log and comes back. Where the log is white because it has snow on it and the field is white, the only way you can really make that log look as though it's laying under the snow is to put a shadow behind it. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to work on putting a few shadows in snow. So let's take a look at some materials we're going to use for this demonstration, and then we'll get started. If we come over to the palette, this is a palette I designed. This is a Sterling Edwards Big Brush palette, and I've got just a good variety of transparent colors. These are My Mary Blue paints. They're very, very good quality. And what I'm going to do on this demonstration primarily is use primary blue cyan. That's my main color I'll use. I'll probably use some permanent violet bluish, and I'm also going to use some what's called still to grain brown. Very, very clean, transparent brown. And we may use a couple other colors, but if we do, I'll explain as I go along. It's going to be a very, very quick little demo, but I think you'll find the information very useful. I've got two containers for water, one for clean water and one for washing my brushes. And I have a roll of toilet tissue with paper towel wrapped around it. That makes a great blotting tool. Over on this side of the table, I just have some facial tissue. And the brushes I'll be using for this demonstration are brushes I designed. Now these are, that's a 1.5 inch flat brush. These are the Sterling Edwards Select brushes. And I've also got this, which is a very stiff bristle brush. This is a Sterling Edwards blending and glazing brush. You can do some wonderful blending with this, as well as applying color. Let's use one more brush too. Let's also use this. This is the medium size Sterling Edwards blending and glazing brush. I'll use this to put a few trees in the snow, just to give you an idea how to do a backdrop for a snow scene. So let's get started. Now the first thing you have to remember about snow is right now this piece of white paper is my snow. The only thing I'm going to do is come in and build a network of lights and darks and midtones around it, leaving a lot of that to be snow. But we can't just leave it as white paper. We have to give it some movement, give it some shadows, and give it some depth. So let's start by just doing a quick little sketch. This is where the edge of the field is. This is all going to be sky and trees, and this down here is all going to be snow. So I've just drawn a very simple little pencil line to indicate to myself where the snow stops. And back here there's all kinds of trees, which we'll use the Sterling Edwards blending and glazing brush to paint those. All of this is going to be snow. Now, one thing you need to do with a snow scene, it's such a simple little trick, but it's something I see a lot of people don't do, and I didn't do it myself for years until somebody pointed it out to me. Trees are typically darker at the base of the tree. There's no light down there. That's where the shadow is. And I used to paint very pale trees sitting next to the snow and the trees, it became washed out shapes. It wasn't until it was pointed out to me I should make that darker that I started doing that, and suddenly the snow looked much brighter and whiter. So it's a little trick. It's these little tips that can make life so much easier for us, especially for watercolors. Let's start by wetting this paper. Now this is a piece of Fabriano 140-pound cold pressed paper, and I'm wetting from the edge of the snow up. I'm not wetting the snow. I'm just wetting the sky in the background. Now that that's wet, let's use the same brush. This is the big 2-inch stiff bristle brush. This is the Sterling Edwards blending brush. Let's take some violet and some blue, and we're going to put in a real simple sky. Nothing fancy here. We're just trying to put a little color back here. And as you see, that brush will deliver a lot of paint very quickly. Already, the snow looks white. Just that little bit of value, a little bit of color. Now let's take it to the next level. Let's get the medium-sized stiff bristle brush. Let's start putting in a few background trees and so forth, trying to really give this some depth and some volume. Now, these are just shapes that are going to be growing. These are trees that are kind of growing back behind the edge of the field. And some of these are going to be pine trees. We can do a little pine tree right there. Greens, violets, browns. That looks very rich and very dark, but I guarantee you it's going to dry back much lighter. Now, I'm making this dark specifically right in here. If you really hone in on that area right there, look how white that snow looks now. It's getting whiter by the minute because I'm adding darker and darker colors. And that's really what it's all about. The darker we get, the whiter the snow looks. So here I'm really exaggerating the dark next to snow. It almost looks too dark at times, but I know it's going to dry back considerably, so I overcompensate for that and make it nice and rich. And these little pine trees, I'm just taking the corner of that brush and kind of pressing down. Get these neat little pine tree shapes. That's a nice backdrop for a painting. It's very simple. We're not trying to do a masterpiece here. We're trying to illustrate a technique, so that's all we need. That just kind of shows how to make the snow look whiter, put in a very quick sky, and drop in a few suggestions of trees in the distance. Now I'm going to take some of this same color I have that I used for the sky, using the same brush. I cleaned this brush out. Now I'm starting down here at the bottom, and I'm going to start suggesting the snow. I'm putting a little bit of color in the snow. This is shadow. Clean the brush out, take a Kleenex and kind of lose that top edge. Now it's got just a nice graded wash kind of going up the field. These little studies are fun to paint. They're an excellent way to learn how to control your values when you do shadows in snow, and also how to build depth in snow. Take a few practice runs. Give yourself I always suggest people give themselves a learning curve. We don't learn this stuff overnight. This stuff takes a little time to learn, but it's well worth the effort. Now here I'm putting just a little suggestion of modeling in the snow, and I'm taking a damp bristle brush, kind of loosening the top edge of it. And what it's going to do is it's going to give me the impression that there's little dips and valleys in the snow. So I'm losing the top edge. Now I can take that same color and come down here and suggest there's just a little change in terrain. It's just a little bit, maybe there's a little rise in the snow, then you kind of go over it and it's kind of dark down behind it. And I'm leaving this area right in here. That's pure white paper. It just gives the painting a lot of sparkle. It makes the snow look like there's a little sunlight on it. Now we can make this even darker. Let's make it darker just for illustration purposes. Very lightly with a damp brush, come in and lose that top edge. This gives the snow a lot of depth and volume. And we're going to do one more thing to it real quick before I stop. I'm going to stop just so I can dry this. We're going to come back on dry paper and show how to take this and make it look as though there's a little more activity. I'm watching these trees right here. These trees are still very shiny, which means they're still very wet. As soon as those dry, I'm going to take this beveled brush handle and come in and scrape a few tree trunks. For example, let's try it right here. I'm just quickly scraping a few shapes. If it's too wet, it doesn't work very well. If you catch it when it's almost dry like this, that worked beautifully. Let's put a couple branches off of it. And again, I'm just very quickly popping them in. Don't sit there and labor over these things. They're just little accents. It kind of gives a little more substance to those trees. Lets the viewer know those are trees. We know they're trees, and I think most people will, but this way it kind of reinforces any thought they might have had about them. Now let me dry this real quick with a hair dryer. I'm going to come back on dry paper and show you one more quick little trick about how to really create the effect of snow on the ground that has things growing up out of it. So I'll be right back. Okay, the paper's nice and dry. Now I had to dry this because I want to come in and get a few really fine, hard lines here, a few good shapes. And that's hard to do on wet paper, so we took a second and dried it. Now let's get a blending brush clean and ready to blend with. This is a 1-inch stiff bristle brush, and I'm squeezing most of the water out of it. So it's barely damp, just enough it'll kind of move the paint around, but not really deposit a lot of water into my paper. Now I'm using a 1/2 inch brush, and that same shadow color we had, that's the violet and the blue. And let's just suggest there's a little tree right here. Now this is the little dimple the tree is going to be sticking out of. So I just make a little dimple and I lose the top edge. Now in a few minutes we're going to bring a tree out of that. But in the meantime, let's see if we can't do something right in here with this. Now that's dry, you get a little bit more of a refined line with it in a better shape. I'm going to wait for that to dry. And while it's drying, I'm going to take my rigger brush, go back over the palette and pick up some of this darker color we'd use for these trees. And let's take some of these scraped shapes that I did and just add a little bit of calligraphy to them, just a few branches here and there. Now I'm deliberately bringing some of these trees down behind that little bank of snow right there. That gives a piece of depth. Now if you notice that that tree comes up right here, it kind of got lost right there. We can fix that very easily on dry paper by taking a little bit of clear water and just suggesting that tree with clear water. There's a few branches. Let that set for a second. Then we're going to blot it. Then we're going to wipe it very hard. So here we're going to blot it first, and then wipe it. And there's the tree. It lifts the color right off very easily. Now let's take that color right off the top. So what I wind up with a dark against light, light against dark, then come back up here, I got dark against light. It gives my painting a nice balance. These little dimples are almost dry, so we'll come in a few minutes and do something with those. Let's put a few more little trees in here while we're at it. Now let's drop a tree right down into that dimple. Now these trees are going to be closer, they're in the foreground, so they're going to be bigger. I want to bring the tree right into the very bottom edge of this little dimple. That way it looks like it's nestled in the snow. So I'm taking the same violet-brown combination I had, coming right to the very bottom. Let's put a few of them in there. They're nicely anchored in inside the snow now. And I'll make that a little bit darker right at the very base of those trees, so it really gives them more depth. So now if you look at the snow, it really does appear as though it has volume and depth. You're looking at it across this distant field, and there's all these little undulating things happening where the ground is kind of moving underneath the snow. And then of course you've got these nice dark rich colors what the trees are. And the darker I make them, again, the lighter the snow is going to look. So we're always looking for a way to push values. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make with watercolors is they're afraid to go dark. Don't be afraid to go dark. Get those dark colors in, enjoy them, because the darker you make them, the whiter the snow is going to look. It's a simple concept. Now this is a very simple little exercise, but I promise you if you'll practice this a few times, you'll have this down to a fine art. It works every time. If you get a chance, look at my website, sterlingedwards.com. You'll see lots of snow scenes and other scenes using these same techniques. And be sure to check out the calendar page. You might be doing a workshop near you someday. Thank you.